Greetings and welcome to the Richard Dolan Show, where every week we fight the good fight. I'm very happy to be here with you this week. Well, for the past 3 decades, I have been knee-deep in the world of UFOs, or as they're now known, UAPs. It's been a wild ride, let me tell you. Back in the 1990s, I had to give up my dream of an academic life because, well, UFOs and conspiracies were not exactly welcome in that environment. Looking back, I probably dodged a bullet there, but that's a story for another time. Over these years, I've come to see the UAP subject as a teacher, as like a guide into a world of ever-expanding implications. But let me tell you, it has not been a walk in the park. Despite having a solid academic background, a burning curiosity, a deep understanding of history, and the freedom to dedicate myself full-time to this topic, it has been a tough nut to crack. And let's be real, it's not just me. This subject is a steep learning curve for anyone. And it's even more challenging on a societal level. Most of us are juggling jobs, families, life in general. Plus, we've got a government that has been gaslighting us on this subject for generations, ridiculing and dismissing anyone who really dares to take it seriously. But here's the thing. Despite all these obstacles, we're finally having public conversations about UAPs. There are still skeptics out there shouting about the nonsense and all of that, but they're being left behind. They can't stop the inevitable any more than they can command the tide not to come in. I've been saying for a while now that our global infrastructure was going to make a moment like this inevitable. The communication and research revolution that we have seen over the last few decades is now bearing fruit. We're not in the 1980s anymore. We can share information in ways that were once considered fantastical, and the truth about UFOs could only be hidden for so long. So now we're talking about congressional or Senate hearings on UAPs, about disclosure, whether it's controlled disclosure or something else, and a global recognition that is constantly growing that, yes, UFOs are real. So buckle up because this ride is far from over. Now, in recent years, the conversation around UAP, once known as UFOs, has gained a lot of momentum. We have key figures like Chris Mellon who've been instrumental in pushing this dialogue forward. And I want to show you an article that he just recently wrote that I think is significant. And like all of Chris's work is thoughtful, it's thought-provoking, it's worth your time. I have the link listed there on the image. You can just look it up. It's on the debrief. In this article, Mellon emphasizes a need for, I guess we could say, a controlled disclosure of information related to UAPs. And he raises several pertinent questions. So he wonders if Congress, despite its clamor for disclosure, is truly prepared for the implications of such a revelation. Probably right. He questions whether we as a society are ready to face the consequences or potential consequences of a sudden, uncontrolled disclosure, kind of like ripping a Band-Aid off a wound super fast. The stakes are very high. The disclosure of UAP information obviously is going to have far-reaching effects on our society and on international relations. And Mellon in his article speculates on the potential reactions of the so-called foreign adversaries. He doesn't really get into that, but says that, like, if there's an uncontrolled or catastrophic disclosure, who knows how some of these other nations will react to that information. All right. And then he even wonders about the behavior of the, let's say, aliens themselves or extraterrestrial intelligences themselves. Will outing them change their behavior in some way that we're not prepared for? Who knows? No one really knows. His argument is that the UAP community and the wider society have not sufficiently considered the multifaceted implications of UAP disclosure. Now, as someone who has co-authored a comprehensive book on the subject, and to my knowledge, I think it's still the only book-length treatment of disclosure I've written, I will say that I concur with Mellon's assessment in general. In general, our society has barely scratched the surface of the potential implications of something like UAP disclosure. However, I do believe that there are many additional aspects missing from our current UAP conversation, and I want to discuss those. So one is the history. I've been talking about this a lot. If you've been following along, you'll know there's been a lot of talk about the need for more UAP data. We've heard it from the likes of Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick during his Senate appearance. We've heard it from the Pentagon reps like Ronald Moultrie and Scott Bray. We need more data, is what they keep saying. We hear this all the time. We heard it from the NASA study as well. We need better data. It's all about the data. But here's the thing. It's almost as if they're suggesting that for the past 80 years, the Pentagon has been flailing around in the dark or with its eyes closed, unable to gather any substantial data on these phenomena. Now, that is what I call gaslighting. Let's be clear. It's a fact. It's not a hypothesis. It's not speculation that the United States military has had numerous and sometimes very confrontational encounters with these UAPs since the 1940s. Now, I've been digging into the history just recently, the last year and a half, of water-based UAPs or USOs. And I have found countless instances where these objects have significantly impacted the operation of America's leading warships. That includes aircraft carriers. So it's not a lack of data. The military knows about these objects. They have the data. The issue here is honesty. Now, I get it. The U.S. military might want to keep something like this under wraps, okay? We can kind of understand some of these reasons. But when we erase the history of these UAPs and act as if this whole phenomenon started in 2004 with the Nimitz battle group encounter of the Tic Tac UFO, well, then if that's what we're going to do, we are seriously hampering our ability to understand this phenomenon. The history of UAPs is the foundation for understanding this problem. The history is the foundation. So if we're going to treat this as an intelligence problem, which we should, we need to know when this problem truly began. But how can we do that if we are ignoring the historical data? We have decades of declassified U.S. government and military encounters that prove many such encounters with UAPs. Many of these documents show deep concern from the higher-ups. This wasn't something that was just brushed off. Plus, there were many instances where electronic and film data was acquired and extensively analyzed. It is not helpful and it is not honest to deny this crucial part of our history. As a side note, I think it's important for researchers to carefully examine the long history of UAP sightings and try to analyze historical patterns. We can't just lazily assume, oh, they've been here forever. We need to ask, who is the they that supposedly has been here forever? Is it the Greys? Have they been here forever? There's no evidence for that. Have they actually been here forever since our beginning? Is that actually the case, and what is our evidence for that? I would say that most claims of ancient UAPs or ancient aliens are weak. I'll repeat that, are weak at best and should be discarded. That's right. It gives, accepting everything, which is all too common, gives us an inaccurate picture of the real situation. We need to understand this subject in its own development over the years. I am not saying that there are no legitimate anomalous sightings or encounters in the ancient past. I am not saying that. I am saying, though, that the number of cases that are legitimate, in my view, are far less than what many people attribute. I've gone through these in my own manner as carefully as I know how countless times, and this is my own conclusion. I think there's a lack of historical understanding that most researchers bring to this subject. But be that as it may, there has been an ancient presence, in my opinion, but there has also been a noticeable increase in activity, at least in two stages over the last 2 centuries. And I think that that cannot just be attributed to our improved ability to observe them. There was a jump in sightings during the 19th century, and there was another significant increase starting around the Second World War. Both of these are meaningful. Both of them are important. Both have everything to do with the development of our own species and the interest that this has generated among other beings. I've gone into this at other times. I'll go into it again. I'll leave it for now where that is, but I'll just conclude about the history just by saying if we're not going to be honest about the history of UAPs, why bother having a conversation about it at all? We need to reclaim our history. But it's not just the history. We are talking about the structure of secrecy that is also being concealed and hampered in our public conversation. We are not discussing this anywhere nearly enough. And this, despite the significant revelations brought to light by David Grush at the UAP congressional hearings last summer, the whole nature of secrecy, the whole structure of UAP secrecy remains largely unexplored in our public conversation. You have a handful of members of Congress, including Tim Burchett, who have commendably touched on the seemingly unlawful nature of UAP secrecy. I've often referred to it as legal illegality. So a few people are talking about it, but not nearly enough. It's basically happening in a vacuum to the extent that it's happening at all. The cover-up of UFOs is a crucial part of the overall picture. It's a crucial part of the phenomenon. I don't think we can really comprehend this subject without acknowledging that it has been subjected to a cover-up, or let's use another word, a conspiracy of epic proportions. Our society has been so conditioned to recoil at the term conspiracy theory that most of us now instinctively just shy away from the concept. But this is the result of psychological manipulation. It's another instance of gaslighting. The glaring evidence of the cover-up is right there in front of us. Yet our established media and all the pundits continue to insist that the United States government is doing its best to understand this UAP issue and that there's no evidence of something as sensational as a conspiracy. In this sense, the UFO cover-up has been a malignant growth on our political body. So the structure of UFO or UAP secrecy itself is not being discussed or fully appreciated. But what does this structure actually look like? Can we think about this? Can we conjecture about it? I think we can. I think the Davis-Wilson notes, which were leaked back in 2019, provide a very good clue. Some of this appears to be buried within special access programs within the Department of Defense, and we should also likely include the Central Intelligence Agency and the Department of Energy as starting points also. A lot of people leave out the DOE, but that is the old Atomic Energy Commission and was deeply, deeply engaged in the UFO problem back in the 40s and 50s. So the secrecy of all of these programs, and I'm sure there are others, they're nested within each other like Russian dolls, so that they're essentially beyond the reach of responsible defense officials, let alone members of Congress. It's very important to understand that this fact is the case, that it is beyond our ability to get at. After all, we're constantly hearing the establishment describe our society as a democracy or as our democracy. You often hear that. I suspect when they say our democracy, they're literally talking about it being their democracy, but that's another thing. But we hear this all the time. We're in a democracy. And in this topsy-turvy world that we're living in now, I think the word democracy has lost all meaning. The secrecy surrounding UAP, this is a matter of the utmost importance to the public. It is of the utmost importance to proper governance. It is of the utmost importance to humanity as a whole. And the secrecy on this has completely obstructed any meaningful conversation within our public discourse. This alone seems to me to be illegal and potentially criminal. But the criminal nature of this cover-up undoubtedly extends much further than this. And I won't have time to go into all of the nature of what I think is the criminal element of this cover-up, but I think it goes very deep. I've talked about it before. I'll come back to that. But I will say that understanding this illegal secrecy is vitally important if we're going to have a genuine understanding of our actual form of government, not the pretend version that our leaders regularly proclaim to us. But there's other things that are missing in our UAP conversation. I will say the totality of UAP traffic or activity. This is another key element of this phenomenon, which is barely discussed even by most UAP researchers, and that is the sheer volume of activity that occurs on our planet every single day. It's almost never commented on. Now, I've talked about this so many times before. I'm not going to go into the whole thing again from the beginning. I will, though, repeat the major points that I have been making, which is that all the evidence points to a massive global presence over every continent and every major body of water in our world, and also many minor bodies of water, too. Now, all right. Yes, many sightings of what people think are UFOs can be conventionally explained. We all know this. But many cannot, and many are not. And the numbers, frankly, are staggering. My own estimate is that we're looking at no less than 50,000 genuine sightings of unexplained objects worldwide every year. Yes, 50,000. I don't think is outrageous. I've done estimates where I've very conservatively come to 40,000, but I think that's unnatural. It's very low. This is based on collected North American statistics. It's based on the fact that most sightings are never reported, something that I try to survey every time that I'm out in public. And I ask people, have you seen a UFO? Hands go up. Have you reported this UFO? Nearly all the hands go down. People don't report these things very frequently. And then the fact that most UFO sightings worldwide do not have a decent infrastructure for reporting, so they don't get reported by and large. So when I look at all of these things, this is where I get my number. And I'm going to concede that there's a good deal of guesswork in my conclusion of 50,000 plus per year of good sightings per year. But I have not arrived at this conclusion trivially. And if anything, I think that it is conservative. And the fact is, I don't really see a lot of folks being interested in this fact. And yet it is really one of the single most important elements to the entire UAP mystery, which implies to us to ask, what are they doing? Why do these beings blanket the earth with their presence? And I might add, why in such numbers now, when our own species is clearly going through a dramatic transformation, dare we say a transhumanist transformation. This is a major amount of activity that's going around our world every day. It is essentially hidden from us. Our own media never report this, so it's as if it's not there, but I am telling you it's there. You go to places like the National UFO Reporting Center and read through the reports. It's really simple. It's not difficult. It's open source. There's the MUFON cases, which are not open source, but which are still massive. And there's a couple of other databases in North America that are making it clear. We're getting 10 to 12,000 raw reports in North America alone every year. Again, they're not all good reports, but keep in mind, most people do not report their sightings at all. We're talking about what seems to be a massive number of sightings in North America and really throughout the world. So those are some things that are missing from our conversation. There's some obstacles to UAP disclosure. We've had rumors and claims recently circulating. I think they're probably true, that the UAP Disclosure Act, which is part of the 2024 NDA, is under threat. Yes, I think that's quite believable. We'll come back and discuss this, get into the weeds on this probably in the near future. But for right now, let me just say, in the first place, the military establishment has an 80-year history of keeping this matter secret. Let us not forget this. Moreover, its reasons, by and large, are tied together with the military's mission to expand and maintain the American empire. I know they say it's national defense, but we actually know the real history here. The last 80 plus years since World War II, it's all about the American empire. Now, unfortunately for them, for this military, this empire is now showing signs of serious stress to the point at which something may genuinely break. But break or not, the empire must be maintained to the last. That's certainly their attitude. And toward that end, certain things must be preserved. First and foremost for them is the possession of the technology of UAPs. It is obvious that whatever has been recovered, that it is of immense and incalculable value. You've got material science, you've got nano or smaller levels of fabrication, scientific principles dealing with light or gravity and energy generation. These UAP utilize all of these aspects as if they were on a Star Trek episode. The rule that existed in the 1940s still applies today, which is that the tech and the science of UAP are of immense value, not simply to be exposed and given away by these people. They're going to hang on to it. So the technology. But secondly, the military encounters. That's right. You know, we have known that this has been the case for a long time. Numerous military encounters. This is a real problem. Do these encounters occur all the time? I don't know. Maybe not. I think they happen a lot, and the reports that have filtered to researchers are quite enough. We have known for a long time via FOIA releases about encounters that United States military personnel have had with these objects for generations. More recently, I've been finding many cases of the United States Navy in which these UAP seem to have been able to shut down substantial activities of their battleships, including aircraft carriers, for upwards of 20 minutes at a time. There can be no reason the military establishment would ever want this information confirmed. By the way, I look forward to sharing that and much more information in published form in the early part of 2024. I'm working on it. I've got a lot done. So military encounters, and there's at least one more reason that there's going to be obstacles to UAP disclosure, and that is destabilization. The establishment clearly recognizes the potential for further UAP releases to contribute to the ongoing destabilization of the US-led global system. These are not separate issues. The system is already significantly weakened. Much of this is due to poor leadership and, frankly, dangerous and reckless international actions founded in the arrogance of power. I will add that this is a bipartisan problem. All right, most Republicans, especially the old guard Republicans, are supporting the neocon empire agenda every bit as maniacally as the Democrats. This is a problem that's been growing since the end of the Cold War. America has now reached a point in which its foreign relations are more dangerously and incompetently managed than at any previous point in its long history. If someone really wants to argue with me on this, I will argue long and many, many long hours on this. I've studied all of U.S. foreign policy, its long history, and I've never seen a period in which it's been this dangerously reckless as it is today. The world is also watching this, and they are witnessing the catastrophic failure of U.S. diplomacy, grounded in nothing more than arrogance and the belief in its eternal supremacy. Why am I bringing this up? Because those are the same people who would be charged with managing a controlled UAP disclosure. That is why. These are not separate issues. And the problem of destabilization is compounded by a media complex that slavishly follows the party line on anything having to do with the national security state and portrays all other powerful nations as adversaries. People have no way to counter this. And they usually just don't know any better. They have lives to live. And so they just get hammered with the propaganda. I'm not saying that other nations don't have separate interests from the United States, but immediately to brush all of them as adversaries, as the United States does, is very dangerous, very reckless. And we are seeing the loss of U.S. credibility as a result of that. Anyway, UAP disclosure, I think very likely is understood that it would be something that would further this process of U.S. empire disintegration. And this is because in the event of a genuine disclosure, the United States is essentially going to have to admit to the world, not just to United States citizens, but to the world, that it organized an 80-year deception on the planet. How well do you think that's going to go down? Sure, undoubtedly other countries will be implicated in this, yes. But who's going to deny that the United States has always taken the lead role in the global UFO cover-up? The fact is, these people running the American empire right now for any kind of controlled disclosure, they cannot be trusted. Trusting them to a long-term controlled disclosure process means that they will only follow their own needs, not those of the general public. Maybe I could say not necessarily those of the general public, but I'm just going to say not those of the general public. These people have not ever, do not now, and will not act in good faith. They have been stuck in a lie that they created 80 years ago, and they have no easy way from which to extract themselves now. Now, some people have said that the alternative to controlled disclosure is catastrophic disclosure. And we can all agree that there are many inherent dangers to a genuine UAP disclosure. I've thought about this many, many times. This also, however, goes for any form of controlled disclosure. I don't think you're out of the woods just because you think you're going to control this process. I think, we fool ourselves into thinking that we have that much control over this process to begin with. It's a very strong human conceit, especially during the last few centuries, that we like to think of ourselves as in control of everything. Our species is the ultimate control freak, after all. But the reality is that any form of disclosure, is going to be disruptive. But there's also no way out of it. We are on an inexorable path, and it is a path driven by our own development. We cannot help this. It's happening. It's going to happen. It's going to be messy. It's going to be a lot of unhappy people probably who will not want this to happen, or they will not want it to happen the way that it does. If we see a genuinely controlled form of UAP disclosure, if that were actually truly to happen successfully by the United States government bureaucracy that they are controlling, let's just say, then what we will likely see will play into the interests of a corrupt and declining empire. And I think that's really all that we can say about it. Now, we might say, okay, sure, it's corrupt and declining, but what other options do we have? All right, well, that's a fair question. Because, we do kid ourselves into thinking that we've got some genuine democratic system in which our leaders act in good faith. We don't have that. But we also fool ourselves into thinking that utopia can be achieved if we just try hard enough. Can the current system be reformed into something that people can actually trust? Can it? While we're on the verge of an AI revolution in our society that threatens to displace, basically the entire workforce, for starters, I don't think that's likely. While the world is going through massive de-dollarization as we speak, that is clearly going to have significant, dangerous repercussions for the United States economy and maybe the global economy. All of that, and we're going to go through a controlled disclosure process that's going to keep everyone happy. I think the odds are stacked against that. I would say over the years that the UFO community has taken a lot of flack from the self-styled intellectual elites for being, take your pick, naive, foolish, overwhelmed by some sort of need to believe. You hear that a lot. Well, we used to hear that all the time. All right, maybe some of that was true, but I think most of it was nonsense. But here's the thing. Naivete can go both ways, and it can exist in many forms. One form of naivete exists in the obvious assumptions that one hears these days from some of the outspoken advocates for transparency and for disclosure. These people typically wrap themselves in the American flag. They refer to themselves as patriots. And look, I'm not saying that they are not genuine patriots. I'm not even saying that's a bad thing. I know many of these people, and I'm not even trying to criticize them for that reason. But along with that position is this willingness to accept some very dangerous assumptions, courtesy of the national security establishment, namely that America wears the white hat in this world and that ultimately the American system is trustworthy, while those of America's so-called adversaries are not. To which I just have to say, talk about drinking the Kool-Aid. This assumption causes many problems, and it creates a kind of inverse, upside-down world. The assumption is that America is some kind of democracy and that it seeks world peace and that it works cooperatively with others and with its citizens in good faith. None of these assumptions are true. None of them. It's not necessarily that the individuals running the system are all evil, although as far as I can see, the ones at the top look pretty untrustworthy and mendacious. But ultimately, the problem is systemic. You remove one of these people and, someone else is going to take their place just like them. It's a system that doesn't show signs that it can be reformed, although we can always hopefully, cross our fingers and hope for the best, I suppose. But that's really what it is. We've got a system that has become inherently corrupted and is becoming more and more difficult to manage in a manner that really speaks to the genuine public interest. Now, we can pretend that none of that is true, or the UAP research community can look at this system a little bit more honestly and realize that we're not dealing with a system that genuinely works for the people. So with maybe if we have that kind of an understanding, perhaps we can look again at this idea of controlled disclosure, which after all just means a government-controlled rollout of the narrative. How is it any different from that? Now, in earlier times, we might have been okay with this. You go back to the 1950s or 60s. Okay, it's possible. Sadly, those days have blown by like dust in the wind. They're gone. So now, instead, we're looking at the perfect storm on every level. People are unlikely to feel secure during this coming period. I think there's a lot that we have to be concerned about on every level, and we have to ask, can a genuinely controlled and intelligent disclosure process really be achieved? Well, the best scenario that I can imagine would be to recognize the oligarchic and ultimately corrupt nature of our institutions. They are oligarchic and corrupt, but they are also what we have. It's what we got. So unless and until we can actually switch them out for something saner and better, this is what we have to work with. These institutions must therefore be constantly prodded and pushed, which to some extent is happening now. You can see this happening. There's a coherent insurgency that has formed and is trying to do this. To what extent these efforts will succeed is a drama that we're all living through, and we're going to just have to wait and see it play out to the end. Let me talk now about what gets disclosed, because this is, again, one of these things that just does not get asked very much. There's layers of disclosure. Let me put up my little slide here. Control disclosure, what gets disclosed, who to trust. Oh, well, actually, I already did that. So here we go. What gets disclosed? We're at level 1 of disclosure. First layer, which is an admission that there's something there. This is our place right now. You have the Navy, you got the Pentagon, you got some NASA officials, you got some people saying, well, there does appear to be something out there. We're encountering something. We don't know what it is. Okay, so even getting to this very tepid spot took many years, preceded by blanket denials, lies, ridicule, public dismissals, strict control over our political, our academic, our media institutions, and a number of broken lives in the process. Let's just not forget them. But here we are. We aren't at the level of a presidential admission, but the DOD has said enough that, yes, we can openly acknowledge that something not readily explainable is operating in our world. Okay, we got that. There's a quiet implication that this may well be extraterrestrial, but no one has made this official, so we're in a kind of weird gray zone. But there are many layers of disclosure ahead. Will we reach them? Let's talk about a few of them. Okay. The next layer would be an admission that this something, whatever this is not from around these parts, not from our civilization, essentially something alien. So I think a confirmation of this sort would be like a stick of dynamite, would just blow up decades-long arrogant statements that all this UFO stuff was simply nonsense. But more to the point, I think it would be very difficult if we get an establishment admission of this, it's going to be a lot more difficult to prevent us from going to subsequent layers. This is going to be a tough place to stop. It wouldn't simply be a matter of the American public. Keep in mind, you have the entire world. It's going to be asking, wait, what? You're saying they're not from here, and you know this. So not just even the general public around the world, but think of foreign diplomats and government leaders. Look at it this way. The U.S. has already lost tremendous credibility vis-a-vis the rest of the world. It's likely that many Americans are unaware of this due to the establishment media bubble that most people live in, both in the legacy media and big tech, but be that as it may. But the revolution of a longstanding lie, the revelation of a longstanding lie of such a magnitude, I really think would deal a major blow to the remaining shreds of American credibility. And I don't see that as an attractive prospect for the American establishment at all. The only way to finesse this, if you were to just say, yeah, it looks like they're not from around here, would be for the military establishment to announce that they've only just now realized that these UAP might be extraterrestrial. It's like, we've just studied it and we think they actually might be. So essentially to pretend that they were clueless during the whole 20th century. Now, obviously, this is not credible, and it's not, no one's going to buy that. So I think this layer of disclosure would probably immediately lead to the next layer, which is that the U.S. military-industrial complex has been studying this phenomena for a long time, let's say 80-odd years. I think that's going to have to be an immediate follow-up from the previous disclosure. Now, as stated, that would expose them to the charge of engaging in a lifetime of lying to the entire world. It would possibly lead immediately to yet another layer of disclosure, because once you start getting into this territory, it becomes very difficult to stop this. And that next layer is what I call the red line of disclosure. And it is the line that states the United States military-industrial complex has acquired alien tech and bodies, or biologics, as we now hear. That's the line. That's the red line of disclosure. It's the ultimate admission of culpability and of lying in all throughout this drama. So naturally, if this happens, we can expect all the explanations, national security, we have to protect the public, we were uncertain about the aliens themselves, and all of that. Okay, sure. There's always explanations. There's always excuses for nearly anything that you can imagine. But how well will these excuses serve the interests of the establishment, and how well will the rest of the world really accept them? Because crossing the red line of disclosure opens many other uncomfortable questions. I've got a few right here. Let's get into them. One, how has UAP secrecy corrupted our political, our academic, and our media institutions? Again, this is something that is hardly ever discussed, but you got to think about this. It is not credible that the entire academic community, just by coincidence, happened to think for 80 years that all of this was nonsense, and that no one was able to go in and really study this without being harassed by their colleagues. It's not credible. We know that there's been a longstanding connection between academia and the national security state. There's been books written about this. I think this points to corruption of our university system at a very profound level. You're talking about the most important, really, the most important revelation of our time. Extraterrestrials here among us. What's bigger than that? And they are implicit in their own culpability and dishonesty on this matter. You got the media. Obviously, we talk about the media quite a bit, and rightly so. They're equally controlled, if not more so. And then you've got the political institutions, which clearly show all kinds of signs of having been controlled as well. I've looked at the long history of this. You go back to the 1950s, 1960s, and you see the pressure exerted on members of Congress frequently who did, even back then, want to discuss this matter publicly and openly, and were prevented by pressures behind the scenes. We've known about this for decades. So that's one question that I think maybe not everyone will ask, but I think enough people will ask, and it matters. There's more questions than that, though. Whoops, I'll just do one at a time here. How much does the military-industrial complex really know about this whole scenario? Once it comes out that they have their stuff, their technology, their biologics, it's going to become very difficult for them to just continue to stonewall and say, well, we don't really know much about this. We've studied, but we can't figure it out. No one's going to buy that. It won't be credible, and it isn't credible. So there's going to be a tremendous amount of pressure on that establishment to come forth with more information. It's not going to be a fun issue for any of them to get into. Another question that will inevitably come up with is that people will want to know is, are they in communication with any of these beings or their societies? Sometimes this can sound a little out there, but let's us immerse ourselves in this reality, because the UFO, the UAP phenomenon is a reality. We are seeing that. That reality signifies an intelligence that is not our own. And if that intelligence has been here for a long enough period of time, it is reasonable for us to ask, have elements of the United States government or other groups been in communication with these beings? And how can we find out about that? Absolutely. Another question, maybe even more important than that, is what are their conclusions about the intentions of these beings? As in, what are these beings doing here? Why are they here now? I've been asking this. When I look at the blanketed sightings around the world, how can you not ask, what the hell is going on here? How can there be so many of them? What are they doing over North America, over the Atlantic Ocean, over the Pacific Ocean, over South America, over Europe, over Africa, over Asia? Everywhere you want to look, throw a dart on the map of the world, you're going to find an area where these UAP have been and probably are today. Why? Why? That is the question we must ask. It's the question we never hear, and we must continue to bring this up. And I don't know that we're going to have an immediate answer either, but we're not going to get anywhere if we don't ask the question. And a genuine disclosure is going to start to raise this question. And I don't know that that's a comfortable place for the establishment to be in. So, and then finally, and along the same lines, what can we know about the intentions of these other beings? You know, why are they here, and what do they intend? Are they here for our benefit? Are they not here for our benefit? Are they here just to observe us as scientists? Do they have something else going on? Is Earth particularly valuable to them? Why wouldn't it be? Do you think planets like Earth just exist all over the universe in every place? There are probably other planets that have life, and maybe even that have abundant life, but how common do you think they are? You know, get into the issues of exoplanetary studies, and what we're finding is Earth is very likely a relatively rare and beautiful jewel in this universe of ours. There may be a few others like it, but what we have is really special. Do you think for, maybe an instant that some of these other beings might feel the same way? Well, it's entirely possible. We need to ask. So there's a lot of questions that come up relating to this phenomenon that a genuine public conversation will inevitably bring up, especially if we go past that red line of disclosure. Well, let me begin toward my conclusion here. It seems obvious to me that the human race faces enormous problems on the horizon, and we really don't know what to do. I think there's a vague but widespread hope, maybe fantasy, that super intelligent alien beings have some answers for us, essentially to save us from ourselves, to fix us somehow. And, you look at the human race long enough and you wonder, maybe we do need fixing. Maybe our civilization does need fixing. We certainly don't seem to have a good idea of how to organize our global system in a way that is safe and that provides the opportunity for the wealth and freedom and happiness of all the people living here. Then you have to ask, can any new global system do this? I don't know. That's a whole other series of questions. But one thing is for certain. The UAP cover-up has outlasted its shelf life. It is clearly beyond the expiration date, and we, the world public, need better information about it than we are currently getting. No matter how in the dark we have been in the past, we cannot afford ignorance any longer. We're going through a transition, more significant, I think, than anything else our species has encountered since maybe the discovery of fire. I'm talking about the transhumanist AI revolution, which is happening at the same time that we are now recognizing the global presence of an advanced non-human intelligence in our world. I don't believe that those are separate facts. I think there's a relationship there. I've always believed this. So I would say, therefore, we need to be as aware of the situation as we possibly can. And I do think like the presence of these other beings is an intimate part of the process we're going through, whether for better or for worse. And also that they're present in large numbers at this time is no accident. And our current geopolitical system, meanwhile, is cracking apart. It is governed by an oligarchic group that does not respond to the people in any proper manner. There are some individuals in Congress who do seem to care and want to do well. They need all the help they can get, and then some. We still have to trust that they are at least wanting to do good. For the time being, this is my own belief on the matter. Maybe some of you don't agree, maybe some of you do. But I will say they are facing an implacable opposition that does not want to give up an inch. And while they may have their reasons, we have our reasons too. In fact, this current struggle over UAP transparency, I would say, has been inevitable. We really can no more easily act otherwise than the secret keepers themselves can. You can see this when you step back a little bit historically. Each side is doing what it feels it must do. So we, therefore, need to push hard. If you believe in UAP transparency and disclosure, this is the time for people to push hard. It would be very easy for the interests of truth and honesty to be pushed aside in a process of purely government-controlled disclosure. The people have got to be involved in this, and the people have to continue to push. If people do not push on this, we're going to be in bad shape. This idea of controlled disclosure, again, in theory, if you had a genuinely functioning system that was responsive to the people, genuinely so, you could make the argument that controlled disclosure really is the best way to go. And even in the situation of an oligarchic system that we have, I mean, I'm sure there are people who would try to make that argument nevertheless, but when I hear controlled disclosure, I might as well call it authoritarian disclosure. That's something for authoritarian societies, not anything rooted in a genuinely republican system in which ultimate power and sovereignty resides in the people, who are, by the way, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. But in fact, genuinely controlled disclosure, I think, is impossible anyway. It's like you can't be half pregnant and you can't half disclose the reality of an extraterrestrial or alien presence. You can't, not for very long anyway. This process has its own momentum and it's going to go somewhere. There's a battle. And the fight is inevitable. The outcome is not. So the inevitable fight for transparency and disclosure, I think, has been building for a while, and we're seeing it now. The outcome, in my view anyway, can go either way. It can go down with the trend of the global revolution that we are seeing go on all around us. It's essentially technologically directed control system that anyone can see and feel with their eyes. It's all around us. So perhaps that system will firmly put itself into place in some kind of authoritarian cyber dictatorship type of a thing. And as a result of that, the discourse on UAP or UFOs becomes even further restricted, so that conspiracies are just no longer allowed to be discussed. That's not that difficult to see, that kind of scenario. On the other hand, other possibilities exist too. And we are close, I think, to a place where you have another good hearing happen, some other good witnesses come forth, which that is the rumor mill. I think it's probably true. We don't know where this is going to lead. This could get really interesting, maybe a little messy, but definitely interesting. And through all of it, please remember, you are still the foundation of the government. You are a sovereign being and a free citizen. Never forget this while we race through the double transformation of global revolution and UAP disclosure. Well, that's it for now. If you like this video, please like and share, subscribe to my channel, select notifications. It really does help me out. Also visit my website at richarddolanmembers.com, where I do this sort of analysis regularly. That's it. Until we meet again, let's keep fighting the good fight. Later.